Hello, welcome to No Veto Video. Happy to have you guys along with us this week. I'm Catherine, one of your hosts.
And I'm Carson. And this week we're going to be telling you about The Colony from 2013, directed by Jeff Renfro, and starring Lawrence Fishburne, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Zegers.
So, just to let you guys know at the beginning of our conversation this week that we're going to be having a pretty spoiler-heavy conversation in order to talk about some of the interesting questions and conversations that this film asks that you really need to have the whole of the movie to talk about. So hopefully you got caught at the warning screen if this is something that's going to bother you, but just buckle in, okay? So The Colony talks about a world where this is sort of riffing on our theme from last time around. It started snowing because of some weather control technology that we were using to try and combat global warming that's gone out of control. And since it hasn't stopped snowing, most of the people who are left have been driven underground where sort of heat is available into these colonies. The titular colony in question receives a distress signal from a neighboring colony with whom they have a pact. And when the rescue party goes to discover what has happened to them, they uncover something horrible that then follows them home. Maybe that's a good enough plot description to get started.
I picked this movie for us to review because when I first saw it, it seemed like it was an interesting movie that Catherine would like. I did. Try to pick things that she isn't going to just abhor. I do occasionally if I think they're doing something interesting, but this one looked like it was up your alley. It did some interesting things. It talked about as much of sci-fi and horror does, what our fears are as a society currently, in this case, global climate change, and also doing things without thinking out the possible repercussions. But also talks a lot about what makes us human.
Yeah, I think definitely those are certainly some of the themes. I saw some others, so we can maybe get to those as well. Where should we start?
What did you like about this movie?
I liked the questions that it was asking, and some of the ways in which I think it tied So we're recording this a couple of days out from watching it, and what I've been kind of mulling over in my head as I've been thinking about this movie, not just because we're going to talk about it, but because I think there's stuff to mull over, is sort of this idea of like runaway consequences. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of the plots, a lot of the threads kind of pull together and talk about sort of what happens when we start something for a good reason, but then it metastasizes. Uh-huh. And so in that regard, I think the weather control technology is its own example of this. Mm-hmm. And then the way that they've structured the titular colony in question, especially around, sort of infection control and things like that. But also this idea of scarcity and abundance. We talked about that a little with the Endless Winter show uh-huh. last week. But I was thinking about it in terms of this show. At one point I sort of leaned over to Carson and I said that the Bill Paxton character had sort of like terminal white male syndrome. Like, he's just like so the patriarchy. And let me go back and unpack that a little bit, because just labeling it I don't think is helpful. But so Bill Paxton's playing this character named Mason. And what we know eventually about Mason's backstory is that he was in service. He was in the service mm-hmm. and was in a situation that to me sounded a lot like sort of nightmare apocalypse version of like the Superdome during Katrina.
Oh yeah.
Right, that's what it called up for me. And saw how bad things happened when supplies ran out, and so you can see him like grappling for control, and the only way he knows to stay personally in control is to exert his control over everybody. He's been given the job in this colony of, if somebody is sick in a way that they can't get better, that his job is to give them the option of taking a long walk in the snow without provisions, or killing them. And he begins to get more and more entrenched in the idea that he has this limited amount of, there's this scarcity, and we have to protect it against those who would come and take it from us. And whether that's somebody from the inside, even, that even all of his compatriots for whom he's doing this work are also a threat. And so the idea of what happens when you're alone, and he really was on a course to be the last guy. He would kill everybody. And then the answer he gives is I would be in charge. But I almost wish the line was, I would be in control.
Mm.
Because it's clear to me that that's what he's wrestling with. That's what he's wrestling for. And that there is this fear of loss of control. What if we take a softer line, if we take a more generous stance, all will be lost when the madness comes. And so when they're presented with that very threat, the sort of feral people who have, we can talk about them in a little bit, it's almost like being done in by himself, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my thought.
I want to mention two things about what you've said. First of all, going back to the weather control devices that ended up out of control, which also ties into this a little bit. We see that also in the Cloverfield paradox, that we watched just a few episodes back, where they were trying to solve a very different issue through science, but didn't really plan out all of the possible negative outcomes.
See, I was thinking of a different film, Snowpiercer.
That as well. This feels in many ways like that.
In fact, that if I were thinking smarter, I would have held on to that and made that my override at the end. But
well, you still can.
Yeah, maybe.
But also the person you're talking about, Bill Paxton's character, who had seen all of this go down in the past, the actual leader of the colony was with him through that, and takes a totally different stance on it. He's more of a, we should let everyone, try to get better and give them food and keep them warm and give them a place to stay in quarantine to see if they get better, and then, give them a medical test after a while to make sure they're no longer contagious. And if they're not contagious, let them back into the wider society. And, he's asked, and I forget the exact line, but basically he says, just, keep giving them food until they get better.
Yeah, he has very, very different philosophical stance, right? So this is the character played by Lawrence Fishburne. His name is Briggs, which is actually kind of funny because that's the name for a military prison, Brig. Just as an aside. So Briggs says, basically, his lesson from, what they witnessed in that immediate aftermath of the disaster was, for him, the reason why he wanted to take a more generous stance toward the world and toward the people in it, because he wanted to protect and, he wanted to be there in service. And it actually calls to mind for me just a little bit. The struggles that we're having around policing in our world, which is to say, a lot of the problems we're having around policing in America is because we've got a lot of Masons. Not the group, but a lot of characters like this Bill Paxton character. People within and without are threats and need to be met with the highest level of violence that we have available to us. And that due process slows things down and is obnoxious, and it doesn't matter anyway because we all know what the outcome is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But philosophically, policing should be more like Briggs. The idea of protect and serve. Like, he wanted to build a community wherein people felt safe and didn't have to go through people being chosen to live or die, like in the way that he had seen in the arena. And it was just, as you were talking about that just kind of bubbled up for mine.
Yeah, it really illustrates how two people can live through the exact same events in the exact same place, not just very similar events in different places, and come out with a completely different outcome. There's a child who's a pickpocket in the movie, and Lawrence Fishburne's character Briggs, when his pocket's picked, he just smiles at the kid and goes, give it back. And later when Mason has his pocket picked, he gets really irate. And part of it's because of what was stolen from him, which I don't want to go into too much details, leave some things for the audience. But you can also see it as a sense of personal insult. It's not just what was stolen, though I think a large part of it was that, but he's personally offended that this kid stole from him instead of just being good-natured about it and, give that back. That's not yours.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of this film with the character of Sam.
Yeah.
And Sam's got his own sort of traumatic backstory of loss. But he is kind of a cipher at the end of the day. Like, he's somebody who doesn't clearly remember a world like the world we live in, but still somehow is hopeful for that. Like, there is, this whole film ends on a very strange note that I'm not sure is hopeful, but I think if you are really identifying with the Sam character, it is a hopeful ending. I
would say it's hopeful, but not optimistic. Like, there is clearly hope in the ending moments, but I don't know if their outcome is going to be good or not.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to talk about feral humans?
Sure. So the problem that they encounter in Colony 5, which is the one that Colony 7, their colony, has a pact with, when they get there, well, backing up just a little bit, they lost radio contact with them, which they expected because they had announced they're going to be doing repairs and upgrades on their radio. When the radio comes back on, they hear like an hour-long SOS message on repeat, and they make an away party to go investigate. When they get there, they find a sole survivor of an attack, who just, they want to be locked in their isolation room where they think it's safe, and everyone else just thinks the guy's crazy until they meet basically extremely violent cannibals.
For just a second, I thought they were going to make this a zombie movie, and I was going to be so disappointed.
It's listed as a zombie movie in a number of services.
It's a cannibal movie.
It is. So it is erroneously listed on many services. Currently, the only one that has it, though, is Hulu. It's been taken off of all the others temporarily.
But it was a very nice viewing experience.
Yeah.
So, not to knock Hulu.
No. No ads either on Hulu.
At least for us, we
yeah.
have a subscription, so your mileage may vary. But I was thinking about like, we don't know anything about the cannibal feral people. We don't know ultimately where they came from.
Or even if they were all from the same place.
I mean, the suggestion at first is that, they're, like, that they had lured people out and then followed them home.
Mm-hmm.
That later is shown not to be the case, I think. But, there's this idea of, like, they're hunting and they come into a colony and just decimate it. That in addition to all the other things that have, driven these colonies to the edges of desperation, you've also got a group of people who are trying to kill you and eat you.
Besides just, Bill Paxton's character who wants to kill you.
But not
eat you.
I suppose we all have lines that we won't cross.
Mason is wasteful.
Wasteful. Anyway. But, I've often... we used to watch this, like, Hunting for Monsters television show that was, like, on Discover or somewhere like that. Was that it? Anyway,
I don't remember what channel.
One of the funniest lines that I remember from the whole run was they had a geneticist or someone like that. I think
it was a geneticist.
Who was basically running...
primatologist or geneticist.
Something like that. Samples from this, like, feral man that somebody had tried to kill. And he kind of turns to the camera at one point, and this fella doesn't blink a whole lot, so I'm not going to do a very good impersonation of him. But anyway, he basically says, there's no gene for feral human. If you've killed a feral human, you've committed murder. And
I'm glad they didn't edit that out. A lot of times those shows will take someone out of context or, whatever else. And this, they left in a very powerful statement from a scientist.
But I was thinking about it when we watched this movie because the subtitles, which we use when we watch films so that we don't miss anything, kept identifying the cannibals as feral human. The feral human screams or feral, And it just, like, they're not feral humans. I mean, they are, but they're not. But they're people. Like, even though the costume design, like, it has some prosthetics around the teeth, like, to make them sharper and pointier. But everything that I understand from this film is that, like, they're just people who've kind of turned loose a little bit. But they're, like, ultimately the seeds for that kind of destruction, that kind of destructiveness, lie within all of them. Is this what remains of Colony 3? Is that why they're not talking on the radio anymore? Because they've let loose of something important. And so on the flip side of that, then, so what is important? What is important is relationships, connection, and communication. And I think that also abundance of spirit, that idea of sharing and of giving, that is what is ultimately human for the tellers in this story, I think.
And that raises a good point. It points out something that werewolf movies point out when you lose your humanity. These characters were portrayed as very bestial. They don't use language, they just scream, or I think there was some grunting, but they walk kind of hunched, they sort of lope, they don't... the leader walks upright. Everyone else was kind of animalistic in their movement. And I think that really captured, these people have lost their humanity. They're no longer civilized. They're not a part of society anymore.
Yeah, but I think it still ties into that idea of abundance and scarcity.
It does.
That story.
But from an acting and directing standpoint, I think it really... Oh yeah, no, they really captured that.
So you started off the conversation with what did I like, and the answer is I liked quite a bit about this film. Yeah. I really thought that Lawrence Fishburne and Bill Paxton turned in great performances. For while they were here, I think in the hands of other maybe lesser actors that you wouldn't have, like, there wouldn't have been that much to mull over, really. I thought the settings were well used to give you that sense of claustrophobia and that sense of, and even the set decorations. So at one point, there's a beehive, which the colony has been using to pollinate the plants that they're growing underground. And Carson says, what did she say? Oh, it's not a very big hive. I hope it doesn't have colony collapse.
Yeah.
Which is like a perfect symbol for this movie. Anyway, I thought just the way that they used the setting was really great. I thought there were some interesting allusions to dystopia film. Like, you certainly get some shots that make you think of The Thing. You get some shots. There's a reference that I think to Watership Down. I think there's, I think you get some, like, what happens when colonies go bad kind of references. And I think they're not so heavy-handed as to, like, distract from the movement of this film. But I think keeping those references in mind helps you interpret the kind of story that this storyteller is trying to tell.
Yeah, there wasn't really a lot to nitpick with this movie.
Fails the Bechdel test. Yep.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of female characters that really got screen time, so having a conversation between two female characters would have been hard in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, so why do we care? Because, does that make this a bad movie? No. But does it make it a movie wherein certain voices didn't get heard? Yeah. And that's just something to keep in mind. Being very, like, apologetic today.
Although, while Kai didn't get a lot of screen time, she was one of the most important characters in the movie.
I think the character of Kai was sort of established and interesting, and then ultimately underused.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
In a way that sort of undercut the authority and power that she seemed to have. The way that it fell apart, and the way that it needed to be reestablished. It ultimately didn't come back to her. It went to Sam.
Yeah.
And that's just my quibble.
It seemed to go to the two of them, to me. I don't know. But you're right, though. They did definitely undercut her. Mason specifically undercut her authority.
Conflict there, the tension between them, is that he's making this play for, now that I've got the gun, basically, there's going to be some changes around here. And you don't have the power to contradict me. And that it kind of just gets assumed to be true, without seeing what her attempt to respond is, in part because the plot kind of crashes into the interesting philosophical discussion about leadership and power that I was getting sort of into.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like, it was just a little disappointing. Yeah.
So, anything else you'd like to add?
So, last thought. I don't know. I think there's something important that this film wants to talk about that's a little bit different than some of the other sort of apocalyptic end of the world movies has wanted to talk about. So, hats off to the colony.
Mm-hmm.
How about for you?
There's several things I would have liked to have known backstory on. Not in this movie, but maybe, like, I don't know, a making of or something. Like, how did the weather modifiers work? How fast did they work? Why didn't people shut them off? Which is something you brought up.
I don't care about that at all. That's so interesting.
But also where the cannibals came from.
Don't care about that either. Because
I said, I don't think they should be part of the movie. I think maybe like an add-on, and maybe there was a bonus feature on the Blu-ray or something that.
Because I think by leaving them unexplored,
the
idea is that the seeds of destruction lie within all of us.
That's true.
and can come up from anywhere, from our good ideas, from our worst impulses.
Yeah.
And yeah, so while there's some pessimism about the human condition in this film, I think there's also quite a lot of optimism, because at the end of the day, there's also that the seeds of our hope lie within us too.
Yeah.
And the seeds of resurrection and redemption lie within us as well.
Yep.
Yep. All right. So those are our thoughts about The Colony. We hope that you maybe will have watched this film. Check it out on Hulu. Come and find us here at this video. You can leave comments in the comment section down below. You can leave us comments on our website, novitovideo.com. We will respond to you wherever you may leave us comments. In a little bit, we'll tell you about what's coming up next. You can leave us comments about that as well.
So what's your override recommendation, and would you like to describe it?
I did it last time. It's your turn.
Okay. So every week, at least on the weeks where we do a movie review, we have an override recommendation where we basically say, if you like this movie, you can watch this other movie that has maybe something in common with it, or if you didn't like this movie, here's maybe a better choice for you. What's your override pick for the week?
I think I am going to stick with Snowpiercer. We didn't talk about it last time in our Endless Winter, but we
That's
maybe
true.
ought to have. But like this film, Snowpiercer is set in a world wherein the consequences of are trying to correct for something that's gone wrong continue to play out. But it's a much more class-oriented story.
Mm-hmm.
But it has some of the same ideas of scarcity and abundance, of, who are we at our heart, and like how do we treat one another, and what does that mean for us and for our humanity. So yeah, check that out. It's from Okja director, whose name is slipping my mind. But so if you wanted to check that out, please do.
My recommendation is The Day After Tomorrow. While this movie focused on the struggles of people who were either born into a frozen world or who have spent much of their lifetime in that setting, The Day After Tomorrow shows how people cope when they're suddenly thrust into that scenario, and the different trials that they're going through, as opposed to the trials of someone who just, that's the norm.
All right. So there are your overrides. Next time on Novito Video, we will be talking about animal companions, in part inspired by recent films like Rampage and Isle of Dogs. If you have some favorite animal companion movies or companions in movies, why don't you let us know those in the comments as well, and maybe we can incorporate them into our taping.
I mean, we're thirsty for comments. If you just want to tell us about your own animal companion.
Who do you watch movies with? Does your dog watch a movie with you? How about your cats? Turtles. Don't tell us about your snakes. All right, I'm done.
So thank you for watching yet another episode of Novito Video. Please subscribe. There should be a button. I think it's down in that corner, at least on the web. I'm not sure in your mobile device where the subscribe button would be.
It's entirely possible Carson just pointed to the wrong side of the screen.
Yes.
At any rate, it's a treasure hunt for you. Find that button. It'll tell you when new videos have been posted. Helps us out as well. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time. Bye.
Goodbye.